Hello students, welcome to part 2 of your video on writing a paper, specifically an APA paper. I'm going to be getting into a little more detail now on finishing up the paper. We talked previously on the beginning stages. Now we're going to be moving into what you do after the first few steps. So we already went over getting started, gathering your sources, and planning your paper. In this video, we're going to talk about writing, revising, and editing. Probably some of the more scary steps for many people. I know that these bring with them some feelings of maybe fear or maybe uncomfortableness at least, especially when it comes to making revisions and editing. But we're going to talk about some tips that might help you through that. So first off, writing is really, when we say writing, I think what we really mean is drafting. Drafting has more the process of putting all your thoughts together. Writing is the whole thing, the entire process from beginning to end. So what we really mean is drafting when we say that. And this is the big problem most people face, and that's writer's block. I sit down to write and I can't think of what I want to say. Now, if that's the case and you're writing something like a research paper, then that means you need to go back over your sources. If it's something that is more driven by your own ideas, then hopefully these tips will help you. If you're doing a research paper, I think these will help you as well because these steps are pretty standard. Okay, so first, some tips for writing, or I should say drafting, is using your time wisely. So spread out your writing sessions. Don't sit down and plan to write out a whole paper in a few hours. I'm not going to lie, when I was a student, I did that a few times, but it wasn't the best way of getting it done. So if you know ahead of time you have a big paper to write, try to do small goals and take a lot of breaks. The next step, which I already alluded to in the previous slide, which is read and reread. Get really familiar with your sources, especially if you're writing a research paper. You want to really know those sources so you can represent them well in your paper, and you don't want to quote someone incorrectly or pull out a piece of a text and take it out of context. So you want to make sure you know it really well. And you might want to read it again if you haven't looked at it in a while when you're going to go write about it. Do one section at a time. And I've said this in the first video, but don't start at the beginning. Start wherever you feel most comfortable. You can write any section you want. You don't have to write the first one. You can write any section. So as you were planning your paper, you probably started thinking about what your headings might look like or what sections you want to include. And so pick the one that you feel the most comfortable. Once you finish that, you'll probably have more momentum and it'll be easier to finish the next sections as you go one at a time. The next tip, and this is really just more of logistics, but backups. You must have backups. So I suggest writing your whole paper on some kind of a cloud-based system. If you are not comfortable with that or don't have stable internet access, then I would suggest at least backing up your paper and replacing it on your Google Drive every time you make changes. Otherwise, you might end up with a version of it that is not the most recent one. And I've had many students turn in something that didn't seem like the complete paper. And then the next day they realize, oh, I turned in the wrong one. So you want to make sure you are always keeping the most up-to-date version and always backing it up on a cloud-based system. And then you won't lose it. If your laptop crashes or something terrible happens to your technology, you have a chance to retrieve your work. Okay, so that's very important. All right, next. We mentioned this previously a little bit when I mentioned headings, but as you start writing, it is wise for you to start planning out your sections and use those APA headings. This might be a little uncomfortable for those of you who are not used to using headings or you've only used MLA in the past and you didn't use a lot of headings, but in APA, this is very important. Think of it as your outline remaining in your paper as a guide. So there are levels in APA. We have level 1 through 5. And most papers in APA will definitely have level 1 headings, even if it's a shorter paper. Many will have level 1 and level 2. Some will have level 1, 2, and 3. And a few, if you're writing something really detailed, like a thesis, or maybe later a dissertation or a really long term paper, then you might go up to levels 4 and 5. These last two tend to be for very long papers where you have really detailed topics you're getting into. So think of these as sections that build upon one another. So if I start off, let's say, for example, my topic I gave as the example in the previous video was grade retention. And so I might have a section that talks about the psychological impacts of grade retention. That would be a level 1. If there were 2 or 3 psychological impacts that I wanted to list, those could be level 2. Each one would get its own level 2. Within that section, there might be a more specific category I want to lay out. That would get a level 3. So it's very much like a funnel. Each level is getting more specific. But if you have all the way up to a level 4 or 5, those are related to the previous section. If you're talking about a whole new topic or a new category, then you would have a new level 1. Okay, so pay attention to the formatting here, and it's wise to just set this out in your paper ahead of time as you start writing, and keep it there. Don't go back later and try to add it in at the end. I would suggest putting these here to help guide you in the beginning. Doesn't mean you can't change it and make adjustments. Of course you can, but this will definitely serve as sort of an outline and a roadmap to getting your paper done. Next, revising. This is a step many students honestly ignore and kind of skip past, but it is a very important step. And here are some tips for making revisions. Read the paper out loud to yourself. I know that sounds crazy and it feels weird to do it, but lock yourself in a room by yourself and read that paper out loud. When you read it aloud, you're going to start noticing areas that might seem a little weaker or confusing, and you might realize, okay, I'm going to highlight this and see if I need to go back and fix it. I also suggest using some color-coded highlighting, whether it's a hard copy of a paper or in a text that you typed up, you can still use highlighting. And highlight evidence that matches your research question or thesis statement and find that throughout the paper. So for example, if I had a research question, like what are the psychological impacts of grade retention? Anywhere I answer that question in my paper, I should highlight it to match that. And I would color code it if I were you. Many of you are going to be teachers, so that's something you'll probably get good at, organizing yourself with color coding. And so it will definitely help you visually see if you are actually addressing your prompt and covering everything you said you would in your thesis statement. The next step I would suggest is ask a peer to read it aloud and give you some feedback. They don't have to read it aloud to you, but ask them to read it over. If you can get them to read it aloud, even better, and give them some parameters. When you say specific feedback, what are you looking for? What do you need help with? Do you need help with a certain section that you feel uncomfortable with? Then ask for feedback on that. If you know that you struggle with certain things like organization or transitions, ask for specific feedback on those things. And if you are giving someone feedback, be as specific and positive as you can. Compare your planning to your draft. So this draft that you've written now, that you've been working on, go back to your planning when you did an outline or you had your note cards laid out or your mind map. Does that match what you wrote? That's an important question to ask yourself, because sometimes we start writing and we start adding in new ideas that are not what we really planned. And if that's the case, then you might not really have the sources you need to back that up. So go back and check that. You also want to eliminate repetitive sections and elaborate on those minimal ones that seem like they're a lot shorter than all the others. That doesn't mean that every section has to be exactly the same size. No, it does not. But we want to try and keep some symmetry, and we don't want the reader questioning why you don't have much to say about certain topics. It could be that you don't have enough references or enough evidence for that topic, and maybe that subpoint or section needs to be combined with another section, and that might be an answer as well. You want to also go back and review your requirements again. Make sure you addressed everything you were supposed to address. I suggest people go back to look at the rubric and see what it's telling you is going to get you that A that you want on that paper, and then reread it again and see if you've done all those things. Okay. Last but not least, editing. This is one that a lot of people are really uncomfortable with. Most people feel like I'm not good at writing. And when people say they're not good at writing, what they usually mean is I'm not good at grammar. And that's not writing. Writing is the whole process. Editing for grammar is one little piece of it. And if you're not good at that, welcome to the club. Most people are not. Okay, so it really doesn't matter if that's not your strength. There are tools out there to help you. So we want to get better at finding and fixing our mistakes. And if those are not your natural gifts, not to worry. Here are some tips for you. First off, this is a very simple tool, but putting your paper into Microsoft Word or some other software, and doing a grammar check and a spell check is going to help you. A lot of us use Google Drive, which I encourage you to do, and it does have that on there in Google Drive, but it might not be quite as effective as Microsoft Word. So although I tell you to keep it in your Google Drive, you might want to copy and paste it into a document and see what comes up if you run that grammar check. The next encouraging piece of goals here I have for you, I know this is repetitive because I keep saying it over and over, but reread it again. What are your overall ideas that you're trying to get across? Read it once, look for that. Then read it again and look for those difficult sentences or grammar mistakes that sound kind of awkward when you read them. And then the last time, read it again and look for those simple things like misspelled words or punctuation errors. And all writers have other people read their work. If you are not planning on doing that, please pause, look through your contact list, find somebody in your class or in another class who's willing to look at it, ask a friend to help you out. In fact, if it's not somebody in your group or in your class, that's okay. It might even give you some special insights because that person doesn't really have any background in what you're writing. So that might actually tell you how easy it is to understand. Everyone has someone check their work. I do, everybody does. So get used to it and get comfortable with it. What you're going to look for when you do this last stage of editing is these common writing errors. These are the most common ones that I've listed down here. This happens the most often in college writing, and that is sentence fragments, run-on sentences, misplaced and dangling modifiers, parallel structure, or lack of parallel structure, I should say, pronoun reference and agreement, commas and apostrophes. Some of these might sound like simple fixes. Some of them you might be thinking, I'm not even sure I remember what that is. And that's okay. If you don't know much about it, I have included a list of videos that you can watch. There's a great grammar YouTube channel that talks all about fixing these grammar issues in English writing. And there's also a couple links down here at the bottom that I suggest you check out as well if you need some help with your grammar. That's it for this video. If you need these links, you can check out the presentation that I've sent to you, and you can and click on those links and it should open up the videos and the websites for you. Good luck with your paper, and please contact me if you need any more help.